there's sort of three buckets, and we have been looking at two of these for a very long time. And the COVID-19 pandemic has brought a more intense, brighter light on those two buckets. And it's because of, the concern of safety, of, all those type of things. So let me walk through these, because the first one is, and these are things that we are currently doing and looking at. The first one is the more predictable. How do we, designing in the future or adapting existing buildings, how do we respond to the protocols and procedures associated with things like the pandemic? So I use the reference point of, when it was 9/11, we went in and we added, a layer of security and, x-rayed people when they were coming through, and magnometer machine, those type of things. We layered those into the building just for safety, So I think that one of the things that we've been helping leagues with and teams with is, okay, how do we, do we package food? Do we have paperless transactions? Do we provide another layer of temperature checks? Before you go through the machine, now you got to get your temperature. There's things like that we're helping with that are just simply doing the protocols that are good public safety, recommendations for when the building opens. And it's tricky because the building could have, a third of the people there. It could have, because of that's all that's allowed in, or it could be a full house. So yeah, it's a very wide range of, and the building type is not set up to do this. Just think of any other place where 70,000 people literally are shoulder to shoulder, knee to back, all coming in a very short window, all there screaming, yelling, eating, all going to the bathrooms at the same time. I mean, there's just nothing else like that with that scale and that size that does that. So it's a tricky thing. That's bucket one. Bucket two is let me just talk in general. We have spent a lot of time looking at the virtual world. And all those things that I talked about, trying to create physical environments that equate to the emotional memories and experiences that people have with this building type. The same thing for many years now, or a handful of years, is happening in the virtual world. So there's a whole segment of the population that their number one desire is not necessarily to go to SoFi Stadium physically, but their desire is to have a virtual connection to SoFi. That would be their number one thing they could do. If they can't do that, they may fly to LA and actually go into the physical building. But if you think about, so we've been doing a lot of work trying to figure out how to take these buildings, these events, these experiences, and making those so that it's a virtual connection. So now all of a sudden I'm in Shanghai and the Rams are playing their first game on August 13th. There is a huge number of people that would want to connect to that venue, connect to that event, and experience it in a much different way. And it could be actually a virtual experience, or it could be just, I have the ability to actually sit in a seat that's actually someone paid for and is occupied, but I'm sitting there and I'm experiencing and seeing things and choosing on what information I want to pay for to get, or I get for free because I bought, access to this, and I can pick what I want to see, and I can go back and look at it again. And I now have connections to find out more about, Mark Williams, who designed this. And you can go on and on and on, just like we do with other stuff. So I think that segment of the population is huge. 94% of the people who enjoy English Premier League, NFL, Major League Baseball never go into a stadium. They never have. They don't have the means, they don't have the money, they don't have the access, they don't live in that town, they just don't go there. Now, that person may sit and watch the New York Yankees every single game on TV. And if you gave them this expanded ability to experience the Yankees in a different way, they would probably pay for it, because they can't, they can do that. They can't get on a plane and go to fly to New York, but maybe they could, sit in their bedroom in Iowa and watch and be connected to the Yankees. So it's very interesting, because the second bucket is to take the existing venues and enhance the experience for not only the players that are in there, or the event that's in there, but the people who may not be able to go in there because of protocols for COVID or the pandemic or whatever, and enhance that, so you don't feel like you're playing in an empty stadium, or you just have the connectivity and it sounds and feels like, boy, I know I'm not there, but this is a great experience and I'm connected to it. I feel like I'm sitting in my seat. This is really good experience for me, and I feel like I'm there. It's the best I can have. That's bucket 2. Bucket 3 is that whole virtual connection to the event, or whatever that's just such a wide open, broad thing. But those 2 buckets, because of people for the first time, in your life and my life, saying, well, we want to have the soccer match, but I'm not sure we can have people go in there. All that is good. That's the intensity of the spotlight on that has risen because of the COVID-19.
I believe that we are going to see this thing be, in a large scale, a very temporary reaction. I think that some of the things that we are seeing will be instituted in place to try to get people back to some semblance of normalcy before we really truly return to a normal as a society. The impacts that we're seeing, with respect to social distancing, health mitigations, and screening that gets put in at the entrances of these venues. Some of that stuff I think you're going to see long term. I think social distancing, a seating bowl, for instance, that's a temporary measure. The second a vaccine comes out or that this disappears, you're going to see people going back and filling in the seating bowls 100% capacity. I do think that you will see a change. You mentioned technology. Technology is where I think you're going to see the most long-term change occur. From mobile ticketing, printed tickets are gone. That's done. It doesn't matter who you are, what level of sport you're hosting in your venue, what level of entertainment you're putting into your venue. No one will have a printed ticket anymore, ever. You will go to 100% mobile ticketing as a industry, and that's just the way it is. We'll never go back. As you start to think about the implications of that technology on concessions and ordering, retail, I think you're going to see some adopters of that technology that want some semblance of permanency there, to where I want to order my food and have it ready for me so that I minimize my amount of time that I'm on the concourse or out of my seat and not participating in the venue. I think that makes a huge deal dependent upon the sport. You look at in the US with American football and baseball, for example, there's a lot of stoppages in play. And so I think in those situations with those fan bases, even if they go to the concourse and they have to wait in a line and they come back, they're not missing a huge chunk of the game. A series, a couple plays, an inning, a half inning. But when you start to get into the sports where it's more continual play, ice hockey, soccer, football for you, those sports, or even entertainment, live concerts, the last thing you want to do when you go to a live concert is miss 2 songs that are maybe potentially your favorite song because you're getting a concession or you're grabbing a beer. I think where you're going to see the more sort of universal adaptation to that, or the adopting of those aspects are going to occur in those sports with those fan bases first. And then I think you're going to see it permeate into the others as well too. You know, someone who's going to go to a football match in Europe does not want to miss the game. They're there to see the game. And so having the ability for in-seat service, even, you know, the technological advances of being able to order something and have it geo mapped to your location, to your ticket, to your system, your personalization of your experience, and they bring you your beer, man, it doesn't get much better than that. That's where I think you're going to see the technological advances stay long term. You start to think about even retail, the customization options for retail. I think you're going to see in these venues change long term. The ability to sort of peruse and walk through a store, touch stuff. I think we're going to have to wait and see how people react. I think, you know, that's the biggest thing right now, is that without there being really any examples of fans coming back in a large enough, you know, sampling to garner any real information out of it, we really don't know how people are going to react right now. And they're going to react in a couple phases. There's going to be an initial phase with partial occupancy. There's going to be sort of a maximum social distancing occupancy. And then you're going to have your full-blown occupancy post-vaccine. And we really don't know how people are going to react at each one of those levels. I think when you start to come back, the fans that come back first and adopt it through each phase are going to start to acclimate a little bit more. But if you've got a fan that sort of defers and waits until we say, okay, we're good, we're full occupancy, we're coming back, I still think that fan and their first reaction coming back to the stadium is going to be very, very on edge. They're not going to be ready for those types of interactions. We were having a conversation with someone yesterday with respect to the health monitoring at the entrances. And they said, you know, yeah, there's an argument that can be made both ways with respect to, you know, does it do anything if we're taking your temperature and you have a fever, does that help? What if you're asymptomatic and you're coming through security and you don't have a fever, but you have contracted the disease or the virus? Is it really doing anything, and why are we putting people through that? There's one side of the fence that says, you know, yes, you should do it. It's just one more measure of, if they have a fever, let's get them out of line. Yeah, are you going to catch everybody? No, but you can catch some. And then there's another side of the house that says, yeah, you should do it, but for perception only. It makes people feel better that you are still screening, that you are trying to put another measure in. They likened it, and the conversation yesterday went to sort of post 9/11 from a security standpoint going through an airport. Right after that, when you flew and the alarm went off, everybody around was, you know, would sort of take a step back, eye in on the person that got alarmed and go, well, what are they trying to carry through? Now you go through, and I don't even think about it anymore with all the clearances and stuff that I have to go through an airport, but the alarm goes off every 5 seconds for someone, for some reason, and nobody thinks twice about it anymore. And so I think we're going to see a similar situation with the health screenings for those that do decide to implement them, is that the first sign one of those things goes off or a red light gets put on, there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be in an alarmist mode. Take a step back, even if you're socially distanced behind them 6 feet, an alarm goes off with someone in front of you, it's going to put you, we as humans have an innate desire to be around other people for all of time, really. Think back historically to Roman times, to Egyptian times, whether it be for sport, entertainment, justice, political reform, religion. We have an innate desire as human beings to be in large groups of people for a common theme. Whatever those themes can change, but we want to be around people. We want to surround ourselves with people. We want to be part of something that's bigger than ourselves. And sport just gives us a great avenue for that. And that's where I think when you know, say we get it under control, say a vaccine is issued, say it starts to get distributed, I think you're going to start to see people come back to a sense of normalcy because they crave it. You think about, you know, the Olympics being delayed is devastating to the sporting world. But when it comes back, to be honest, making people wait another year for it might make it the best Olympics that it's ever been.
There's so much involved with this. Let me just start with the big picture. The big picture is that the industry is obviously decimated, and they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars a year. the whole idea of congregation, that's what sports and hospitality is all about, right? So congregation, bringing people together, so that's what we do. So if you can't bring people together because it's dangerous, then you've got to look at A, what are the opportunities that can arise out of this? What are the things that we can change now that have a major impact on other things like control and security that we really wanted to do but we couldn't do? So I liken this to the airlines industry. Prior to 9/11, you just walked in, you showed your ID, you don't go through all the security. Well, okay, that and what happened was, very bad people got on airplanes and took them over. So the industry is always worried about that in their buildings. Bad people could find ways to sneak in and do horrible things. So I think that this provides an opportunity for the leagues to create something similar to a TSA in terms of writing guidelines, so that we get away from paper tickets. We get it's solely on using your cell phone and data to know who's in your building, and frankly have continuous facial recognition around the venue for both security, but also for frictionless and touchless, transactions. So because touchless is sanitized and safe right now, so let's call it touchless for that purpose. But in reality, it's also very frictionless, right? It's if it's easy to pay, just like swipe right for Amazon, it's easy to pay. Your tendency is you're going to buy more. It's just human nature. So, and we've also got an entire generation that was uncomfortable doing online transactions, maybe in-seat transactions, to now be able to do that. So all of this, in the future could promote F&B and merchandise sales. It'll make it more convenient, but it'll also, could also and should also ramp it up. So that could be a good thing. And on the other hand, you're not touching, you're not trying on. You're able to, try it on virtually because you put your measurements in. It creates a model for you, and you know whether you want a medium or large. And then it's delivered to lockers or safe places that you are able to get access to from facial recognition again, or from retina scans or other things. So, that's one kind of opportunity that's created. And the second thing that I think is on the tops of mind of all these facility operators, team presidents, and owners is the difference between temporal changes and permanent changes. What are things that in the future we'll never want to do again? We know that we're going to put people right next to each other and we're going to shove them in. We're going to pack our stadiums just like we did before. That's not going away. We'll get a virus for this disease. People will forget about it. And then very likely another pandemic will come along and we'll do the same thing. We'll scatter and we'll create these short-term seating solutions where we're putting 25 to 35% people back into venues and putting up guards and plexiglass guards and things like that will all go away. So those are some of the those are as we see them short term. Long-term things like sanitization, turning cleanliness and sanitization into hospitality is we see as a permanent thing. Much like when you think about concession stands and kitchens 25, 30 years ago, all the cooking was done behind a wall. Nobody thought to see it, but the minute it became invisible, and restaurants, really great chefs in New York came out and were preparing food right at your table, and you know, and the kitchen came out into the middle of the seating. You felt like the food was fresher. You could see it, you know, it's coming, it's clean, it's you know, it's good. And somebody's making it in front of you. There's an act to it all. Well, the same thing could apply to cleanliness and sanitization. The idea of making a show out of it, a performance, and having it continuous and not something that's hidden and behind the scenes could very well, you know, be something that we see in the future.
I think it will be a permanent thing if we're talking about health and wellness and sanitization and the likes. I think if this pandemic has taught us anything, and I hope it does teach us something, it probably is not going to be the last one. You know, when you look at how we live as humans, how we begin increasingly encroaching on natural habitats and the cross movement of viruses between animals. I hope we're better prepared next time globally. But I think as consumers, and ultimately it is us as consumers of sport or entertainment, who will drive this. And I think we will see certainly the sanitization and the health aspects here to stay. I think we will, if we don't have them regularly, we will certainly be and are designing space in and around our buildings to incorporate health checks as much as we've now incorporating, you know, mag and bag and security threat checking, which is, you know, 10 years ago was confined just to airports, but now very much part of our lives. And I think our job as designers is how you can incorporate that as seamlessly and painlessly for our consumers. I mean, regardless of pandemics or security threats, we still want our fans to have great experiences. They still want them to feel, you know, this is a great place to come. It's easy to get into. It's easy to leave from. So it makes it more complex as designers to incorporate more and more of that into our buildings, whilst keeping the experience unlike, you know, a TSA line at JFK Airport. But I think that's definitely here to stay. And I think the cleanliness, sanitization, I think, you know, there's lots of moves around. You'll have seen the work we're doing with OVG and their Wellness Alliance. I think you'll start seeing, much the same way we have here in the UK, you know, rankings out of 5. Every restaurant has to display a sanitization or hygiene standard in the front window. Out of 5, is it clean or not clean? And I think we as consumers will want to see that. I think you'll definitely see more theatrical cleaning, for want of a better word. You know, we as designers and operators have always tried to keep that piece of the operations invisible. But I think, at least in the short term and maybe longer term, we'll want to see cleaning crews. We'll want to see things being wiped down. We'll want to feel that our space is clean. I think the technology piece is interesting, because I think that certainly had been happening, and, you know, it's both a fast and slow moving adoption of that. But I think if anything, in the work we're doing with lots of clients around the world, is how can you integrate more meaningfully a remote audience into a live event? And I think this blurring of live and virtual and remote and present audiences has been kicked on enormously. And I think that's here to stay. I mean, if you look at, you know, Jerry Jones famously once said, you know, he opened Dallas Cowboys and said, 1% of my fans will ever visit this building. So how do we meaningfully engage that other 99%? You know, you look at Man United, you know, through Old Trafford, on a sellout 30 games a year, you'll get 2 million people into Old Trafford in a year, but have 650 million people who identify as Man United fans around the world. And I think this technology, video conferencing, virtual reality, will become a much more integrated part of the live event. And you look at music, I mean, there's been some fantastic, you know, lo-fi events around the world, you know, the Rolling Stones playing from their living rooms together, you know, down to things like Futurelands, or these fully virtual events. You know, we have a band in our office who did a fantastic event the other night for 150 of their staff, created a full VR environment, everyone logged in, you could have a virtual drink watch the band virtually as they played from their own living rooms. And it was great. I think it was a really interesting way of connecting. And I think we will see more of that merging of real and virtual into the live event. But I think probably, and this is a personal opinion, I think the biggest impact on sports and entertainment venues coming out of this, or certainly pushed forward by this, will be both health and wellness, but also sustainable and green technologies, and the sort of focus on the wellness of the space itself. Yeah, so I think we'll start seeing more of, you know, the great little farm that, you know, the Red Sox set up on their roof outside the stadium. I think we'll see much more sustainable technologies. I think we'll be much more interested not just in cleanliness but wellness. What's the quality of the air in the space? Is it naturally ventilated? How can I get natural daylight? And how can I build these buildings and run them on a much more sustainable footing? I mean, they're not directly related clearly to pandemic and viral spread, but I think there's a movement there that we want cleaner, safer, better environments.
Interestingly, whilst the country has been in the news because of those two issues, for us as a practice, we've not really seen much impact. There's certainly the result of the bushfires is a far more awareness of climate change. So the issue of how the buildings actually address climate change is becoming more and more important, because we have objectives that by 2050, the state governments want to be carbon neutral. So put aside what the federal government says, the states are saying we want to be carbon neutral. So we are seeing the beginning of a far bigger interest in what does that mean? How do we achieve those goals? What innovation can we bring in to help with those goals? So that's certainly as a result of the bushfires. The bushfires, though, then went relatively quiet. There's a massive recovery going on out in the rural areas where the fire was significant. But in the cities now, I mean, you know, we don't see any evidence of the bushfires in the cities in Melbourne or in Sydney or in Brisbane or Canberra. So really the areas that were severely impacted were the tourist destinations along the coast between here and between Melbourne and Sydney mainly. And they've, you know, suffered quite significantly, those communities. So a lot of the money is going into rebuilding those communities. COVID has been an interesting journey for us in that we were beginning, and we were sat on an advisory body about how to get people back into venues. Because obviously mass attendance at events has suddenly stopped. And, you know, at the end of the day, the buildings that we love, the stadiums, are all designed for mass assembly. They're not designed for, you know, putting one person in every 4 meters. It doesn't quite give the crowd that sense of crowd. So we've been looking at and looking with venues about how we might do that. We've had some interesting ideas about how you can get smarter platforms in for grouping people together and monitoring people, assessing how ticketing can work in clusters rather than individual seats. So that's been quite an interesting piece. I think the impact for us from an industry point of view here in Australia from COVID will be as significant as the terrorist activities have been that have influenced safety. But I think what we'll see a lot of is the backroom stuff in a stadium, a lot more technology about thermal imaging, about social distancing, about touch-free environments, so you're not touching things, as opposed to, you know, a definitive, you know, we're going to take every other seat out. I don't think that's going to happen at all. What I mentioned before in terms of our sporting clients, what we found is the work that we were doing for the clubs has been put on hold because the club's revenues have been absolutely smashed. You know, they're still paying players' salaries, but they've got no revenue. The TV revenue has been absolutely decimated because the value of the product's not the same. And of course, there's no crowd attendances. So there's no people going to the game. So what we've seen is quite a harsh cutback in expenditure by the clubs because they've essentially seen about 40% of their revenue disappear. Now, the good thing for us in Australia and New Zealand is our venues are generally not funded from private equity. They are funded by governments, and they are seen as stimulus projects. So Sydney Football Stadium, still carrying on. It's absolutely now seen as one of the government's stimulus packages that has to keep on going. So even though we've got, what's our team, Russell, 60 people, 70 people?
About 62, yeah.
All working remotely from home, but all connected. So we're delivering it. It's coming out of the ground right now. So that's still happening. The hit, we've got a planning impost from COVID, like 9/11, but the financial impact is like the GFC. In fact, in some ways, a bit worse. So unlike 9/11, that didn't really have a massive financial impact, the GFC did have a massive financial impact, particularly on the large financial institutions and what they could spend in product, going to matches and stuff. Now what we've got is all those companies have got serious balance sheet issues that they will be redressing before they spend money on hospitality. It was a very interesting paper because it said that with no crowds in, basically home ground advantage disappears.
Yeah.
There isn't any advantage. It's the crowd that makes the home ground advantage. And the statistics proved it. You know, it was a win-loss ratio was 50-50 if there was no fans there. If it was a home ground, the win-loss ratio was 60-40.
It's a really interesting point. Like, we've had one of the national sports bodies is we did some work for them early this year about a potential World Cup bid in almost a decade's time. But what's happened is, of course, COVID-19 hit. We finished our work. 70% of their staff have been laid off, you know, in this organisation. And of course, the government, the last thing, they were looking for government support, federal government support. And of course, the last thing the government wants to think about now is something like that when they've got so many other issues on their hands. Like, they're struggling to deal with just the problems they've got with dealing with COVID-19 and unemployment, you know, trying to keep busy, you know, industry busy, etc. So sport, unfortunately, whilst it had a high profile before with government, has really started to take a bit of a backseat. And in a way, it's been a bit of a nuisance because everyone, you know, for example, like New Zealand, like NRL and AFL want to get back on the field and play, and the government's almost embarrassed, you know, to have to deal with it at this stage. They'd rather not. And the other thing on revenue is the fact that a number of these, particularly the international sports, are quite concerned about their cash flow from what are often their major finance, you know, generating activities, like with international tours and so forth, whether people coming here or Australian teams going over there, but primarily coming here. And so there's a lot of uncertainty at the moment about what financial position they'll be in, you know, 6, 12, 18 months' time. And of course, it's unlikely governments will bail them out to a certain degree. So it's probably going to possibly reduce down the amount of content. You know, simplify competitions. It's interesting with the Super Rugby competition at the moment. It's now a situation where it's become a national situation in terms of restarting, because you can't cross international borders. And so obviously the New Zealand comp started 2 weekends ago. I think the Australian comp will start in about 2 to 3 weekends and so forth, but it's going to be a very different situation from what they had previously. And so their revenues and so forth generating out of that will be less. Obviously, a lot of stadiums have been going cashless, but that's going to be almost like mandatory now because people won't accept hard currency for transactions. So it's going to technology. I think one of the other things we'll see is that technology will also step in. And Alice has mentioned about hygiene. So obviously, you know, touchless facilities, etc. Technology will step in there. But I think we'll see, you know, the comms in terms of food and beverage service, etc. There's going to be an uplift in the use of technology beyond which we've seen now. And who knows what some of the newer technologies will be, which will then come into play as well. One of the issues with Australia with the bushfires was that everyone was looking for some relief after it. And things like concerts and sport were a very important part of that. And now we've sort of been denied that for a period. That actually hurt quite a lot. You know, like a lot of people felt, I think obviously, you know, when you're suffering difficulties, if you can be distracted and entertained and feel good about something, it makes such a positive difference. But when you can't, I think it's doubled, the sort of like the pain these people were in. And of course, then the government's focus, instead of helping them out in terms of overcoming their issues, has obviously gone to the larger question: how do you keep this, the whole economy going? How do you keep people, within the country safe and the economy going? So it's been a pretty tough, particularly for those outlying sort of areas. The interesting point also Alistair made about the environment. Even though the cities didn't, like Sydney and Melbourne, didn't actually really suffer directly from the actual fire, we actually suffered a couple of weeks of very high levels of smoke infiltration in the air. And it suddenly brought home to everyone how delicate the environment actually was. And that hence the major push towards more sustainable or environmental responses than previously. It really brought it home.
The lower league teams are extremely concerned about their future, because obviously the TV component is important, and thankfully they've got it all. Sky is not asking for that back. So the Sky BT component for the Premier League clubs is being paid. So they're very happy about that. But of course, with no turnover on a match day, they're in difficulties. Any club below the Championship is in real threat of being put under when most of their revenue is match day. For the Premier League, maybe 20% of their revenue is match day. But it still matters, of course. Thankfully, for these behind closed doors matches, Sky BT's viewing figures have been amazing. They've been spectacular, which is why they've not asked for a refund. But I don't think that will last, because the behind closed doors production is poor, isn't it? I'm surprised about the 9/11 comment, but maybe that's an American-centric perspective. I see this as something that is going to happen more and more. There'll be another pandemic and another pandemic. The world is pretty messed up, and the density in which we're trying to create the food to sustain ourselves and the way we're living is a breeding ground for this to happen again and again. It's not a one-off. It's something we're just going to have to live with. I would compare it to HIV more than 9/11. We thought it was a world potentially killing a risk. It's horrendous. It kills. It's still with us, but we live with it. It's something that we've come to terms with. We can't cure it, but we and it can still kill, and we live with it. And there'll be COVID-20 and COVID-23, and it will go on. What we need to get better at is how we deal with it and how we react to it, and how we get through to the other side faster, with a bit more, obviously a much better approach than potentially America or Brazil or Mexico are taking to it. Although the UK, of course, has not covered itself in glory in the speed with which we reacted either. But I think it's the way it is. And if you're talking about the new normal on stadia, I think we'll be back to a completely full normal stadium relatively quickly, because it's the only way stadiums can function. They're the epitome of a tightly packed group social event. We talked with various clubs about all the intermediate positions that they could take before they can have full capacity, and none of them are actually credible. The idea of we've been fostering sustainable transport just to get to the stadiums for years. So even getting there in buses and trains, and of course every day the buses and trains for a football day are as packed as they could possibly be. So getting there is a challenge anyway, even if you had measures in place at the stadium. No club wants to sell a season ticket for 1 in 4 games. You can't have 25% capacity. Who would buy a season ticket to go and see 1 in 4 games? And which games do you miss? Do you miss the Liverpool game? Do you miss the Man United game? And of course, even if you came up with a crazy seating arrangement in the actual stands for a quarter capacity, everybody goes to all the concourses and mingles, and it's unmanageable. So I think we're in a situation where the new normal is right back to normal. It's just a question of when. As for the question of going, the new normal being virtual, I couldn't disagree more. Certainly in terms of the Premier League, the Sky BT media deal is absolutely predicated on what you're seeing and that close fans player engagement, the genuine crowd noise and the genuine crowd reactions that you get in the moment. And even focal length of the cameras, we've talked about this before, Michael, about the fact that it's such a good production quality. You're seeing the fans in focus with the players. You're getting that direct link. As you see them gearing up to take a corner, you're seeing all the fans in the background, ready for that, excited for that. You just don't get any of that in a virtual world. Sky don't invest in 36 cameras per game for the fun of it. That multifaceted, engaged product is where the money comes from. So no, I don't see virtual football as being a relevant model at all. But I don't think it'll go as far as all fans wearing masks. It's unpoliceable. You'll never get the ultras of a club wearing masks. And can you imagine asking 2 or 3 stewards to force their way into a packed stand to physically remove somebody because they're not wearing a mask? It goes against all the ideas of what we're trying to avoid. So I think, yes, there'll be an increased cleaning and hygiene regime, but it's still within a busy stadium.
I think we're slowly finding out that we might not ever go back to the way it was. But I think at the same time, we have to be, and what we tell our clients is, sporting venues aren't going away. People they will still want an experience. There's still going to be that authentic experience of going to an event. Sporting, the teams themselves, the teams and clubs themselves will want, people in the stands. They'll want some sort of energy from that. So I think, the idea of the sporting venue it's not going to go away. But, and so, what we're encouraging is, and what we've seen from our clients is, we're a bit of a wait and see attitude. Like, don't sort of throw out, everything or rethink everything too quickly. I think we have to see where some of these things are going. Until people feel safe sitting in a venue in close proximity to each other, they're going to be reluctant to go back. And until, for a municipality or for a building operator to sort of, from a liability standpoint, to feel safe letting people into the venue, then, and they're going to be reluctant to do that. So I think that, we have a ways to go to figure this out. But, the stadium or the arena as an experience is from my perspective, it's not going away. But I think it will evolve. And I think what's interesting, and we've seen this in our other markets, the pandemic hasn't necessarily started a new trend. I think it's accelerating. It's accelerating some trends and it's slowing other trends. And I think one thing is that, there was a trend on a large scale venues about, maybe fewer seats and more amenities in the venue. And I think if anything, we're going to continue to see that kind of trend. I think, the idea of having people maybe less, going to the venue is going to be less about sitting in your seat, and watching the event. They're probably going to become more mobile. And so the idea that, you might you might be able to move around and experience the event in different locations, is something that's, you know, it was starting, we started to see it in some of our clients, and we had a client in Major League Baseball recently that, you know, they would find that people would come, they would actually sit in their seat for about half of the event, and, you know, half of the game. But other times they were looking to kind of walk around and experience the event from different vantage points. The whole, you know, process of security, concessions, you know, merchandising, things like that, that's all going to evolve. And I think the idea of security, you know, here in the U.S., we have to go through the big magnetometer to get into the stadium, and you have to unpack, you have to take everything out of take your wallet out and your phone. And I mean, people don't want to do that anymore. And I don't see that really. I think there's already a trend towards security being more transparent, less intrusive, more touchless. That's accelerating already. We see it accelerating in our corporate work. We see it accelerating in healthcare. I see the same thing happening in sports. So I think the whole process of entering a venue is still going to be as secure, but it's going to be a lot more, I think the opportunity here is that it becomes a lot more transparent and touchless. And I think also, you know, same holds true for food service and other types of places where people sort of interact in close quarters. And then I think, you know, another aspect is, you know, I have a particular interest in automation, and, you know, how 5G is actually enabling 5G and 6G that's going to be coming after it is enabling automation, both in terms of, you know, automating routine work, but also automating aspects like facility maintenance and building operations. And I think, you know, you will start to, there will be a lot more automation that people will encounter as they enter into a venue. So now I think from that standpoint, the experience that one has coming into the building, moving through the concourse, and you know, when they do go to their seat or wherever they're going to watch the event, that's going to evolve and be very different. And so, and I think technology is going to enable us to do that, you know, over the next, I'd say, 5 to 10 years.
That's interesting, because in some ways, it was in the U.S. for sure, but we've definitely been doing this globally. You know, that's one of those things, like kind of back to our conversation about like football and the World Trade Center. We're at our core, we're also a resiliency company. We do a lot of disaster response, a lot of recovery and rebuilding work. We've done Hurricane Sandy. We've done a number of hurricane response and rebuildings down in the U.S. Virgin Islands, places like that. So when the pandemic hit the United States, a lot of those sort of contracts we had in place rolled over into alternative care and medical. And so we've done a significant amount of work for the US federal government, and then we've transitioned in that to a number of European countries to do the same thing, you know, development of alternative care hospitals, field facilities, either in existing venues or, you know, in temporary facilities. But the thing that was interesting about the way our company responded was we have such a huge practice in certified industrial hygiene, industrial hygienists, biocontainment engineers, biocontainment specialists, that's exactly what kind of the healthcare and the federal government, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and then, you know, the similar kind of entities overseas, that's exactly the expertise they needed. And then I don't know if you picked up over the weekend, but ASM Global did a press release on their Venue Shield, which is their global protocols for reopening venues. And so we were one of their major partners in that through our certified industrial hygienist and biocontainment engineering practice, we created all the protocols that underlie that document and underlie that approach. So it's for our group, it's been interesting because if nothing else, we're able to have a different kind of a dialogue with our clients. A lot of folks are struggling to just get their arms around it, like we all are. What does this mean? How can we have competition safely? Never mind fans. Can we have competition safely? What does it mean to our training rooms, our locker rooms, our athletes? I mean, I think you see in some of the information leak out about what the NBA is doing down in Orlando with these rings. You saw the PGA announce that they're getting all the golfers and caddies whoop straps because what whoop strap does with your breathing rate and heart rate monitors when you're asleep, they've sort of stumbled on a correlation between changes in your heart rate and your breathing rate towards an advanced warning for someone who may be pre-exhibiting COVID symptoms. So you're seeing some of that, but sort of back to your question, it's been helpful through that work. We're doing the same thing with the NBA. So we're writing all the CIH and stand-up protocols for the NBA, getting ready to move over to another one of the leagues, and then handling that for a number of the bigger football-based universities, couple of pro basketball, pro NFL type clubs. I think people are starting to realize the more this goes on that they don't have the answers with their facility staff. They don't have the answers with their medical training staff. And in some ways, the industry is struggling to come up with real specific guidance as well. I mean, there are some really interesting documents from the ticket broker group, some of the food concessionaire groups, but everything's lacking a certain amount of specificity because none of those companies have these CIH and biocontainment groups that we have where we can synthesize all that together. So I spend a lot of my days, me and a couple of members on our team, we spend a lot of our days on calls with these health professionals and these engineers and these scientists, kind of translating sports for them. So they understand what the chemical and the infectious disease protocols are, and we teach them how to talk sports. So they teach us how to talk COVID, and we teach them how to talk whatever the sport may be or the training room or whatever it is. So then we can provide a more scientific-based set of guidance principles to teams that are trying to get athletes back in to work out, or wanting to see what their revenue models might look like for live sports with fans, or just what is it going to take to get people safely on the field regardless. Where I've landed, there's sort of two things I would say. One, we tell people to be patient, don't make any big decisions for probably the next 12 months. Let's still try and handle disinfection as an act, if you will. If you think about like safety and security, mag and bags, bomb screening, like all that stuff that we do at venues around the world now, let's just try and add disinfection and sanitization to that. That's probably enough, at least for the foreseeable future, before you start swinging a hammer and a crowbar to your building and making big physical changes. But, I definitely think there had been some good advances around, optical ticket scanning, touchless ticket scanning. There were some new products in the market, at least over here, within the last 2 years that I think will probably get some more traction now. For a long time meaning like 6 weeks, I've been using like the post 9/11, at least for Americans, post 9/11 as an example of how people might process this and how we might see change. In other words, the immediate reaction in the days and weeks after that event was to overcompensate for security and screening, a lot of show of force, a lot of barriers, a lot of that. And then after people sort of processed it, I don't want to say they relaxed, but they came to terms with what happened. You started to get more rational. And now we have, clear bag policies and we're comfortable walking through metal detectors everywhere we go. We're comfortable with that screening line being a certain distance away from the stadium. Like there's just things now that we accept when we go to live entertainment, whether it be sport or music or whatever, that are the outflows of events like terrorism. And I was trying to come up with like a better example because terrorism is always so heavy, but it's almost like what's happened in the global marketplace from say like incandescent light bulbs to LEDs. We went right from traditional light bulbs right past fluorescent to everything's LED now. You can't can't shake a cat without finding an LED bulb somewhere. And some of that was, energy providers, global energy initiatives, carbon initiatives, or all these things, but it expedited that transition of technology to everything. I don't know that we're going to get that kind of quick sea change in sports, but I definitely feel like, touchless, mobile ticketing, mobile ordering, not like in-seat ordering, but being able to place an order maybe from a phone and then have it go to a concession stand and you go pick up. So ways that we can disperse the lines a little bit. You may see some of this virtual queuing for a little while where people arrive in waves. And again, theme parks have been doing this for a long time. Things like Disney with fast passes, you show up within a certain time, so you manage the line. And presumably while you're not waiting in line, you're doing something else to spend money at their park. So I could see virtual queuing, virtual arrivals kind of take off for a little while. I don't know if that's going to be a forever thing, but definitely touchless and mobile. Feel like, hey, anything you can do to eliminate touch just as a concept is good. I mean, your phone is your phone. My phone is disgusting, but at least it's my phone, and I know that it's my germs and my virus on it. I think that eliminates a lot of the risks. You'll see, I think touchless for water faucets, flushing, a lot of that stuff in bathrooms has been around. The one thing we've been kind of curious about is hand washing. I think you'll probably see an overabundance of hand washing stations all over the place. I'm trying to think what might be the equivalent to that. I can't think of anything, but I know a lot of people are renting these portable plastic, like you see them at music festivals or construction job sites. I think you're going to see a lot of those things for the next year or so, just to kind of get hand washing into the consciousness. No different than like taking your shoes off before you get on a plane, or having to pull out your toilet, your toothpaste and your deodorant and scan that through separately. I think there's going to be a push to try and get hand washing to be a little bit more of a influenced behavior, like putting on your seatbelt when you get on a car. Because there's a lot of things can happen when you get people to start washing their hands more, and what, where that goes. So those are the things I guess I would probably say are going to be the more reasoned outflows of this. I don't know about like, stadiums with video screens that simulate fans. I mean, I think we're all going to be willing to accept a lot of weirdness for like the next year, maybe even into next season. We just want people to start. We want sports to start playing. It's such an important part of our cultures and our identities and in our economies. I think we want it, and we'll be willing to tolerate some things. But is that the future going forward? I think eventually, like I said, either there'll be a scientific and a medical answer to some of this, or we'll have figured out other protocols. But it's a challenge because, like, even some of the venues that we're really deep into consulting with, if it's an older building, you may not have the room to create the space necessary to socially distance, food and beverage, restrooms. Again, I don't know how things are over by you, but a lot of buildings here are old enough that their restroom capacity is just not adequate. And so even on a good day, having long lines at a bathroom is normal. But now we're trying to eliminate stuff like that, and the building just may not be capable of supporting it. So I don't know. I mean, we've had some clients want to explore more what I would describe as sort of more European models for restrooms with sort of the individual compartments. So you make things almost everything gender neutral, and then the hand washing becomes more of a public act than an act that's associated with going to the restroom. But again, I don't know if that has uptick, because when you really start looking at what does it take to implement those kind of changes in buildings, that's some of the most expensive infrastructure to fix. At the height of it, it was funny because we like, hey, everything you thought was true on Monday is different on Tuesday, is different on Wednesday. Like every day, what you believed to be fact was either refuted, or it had evolved so much that you had to recalibrate to a new truth.
It's mixed. It's there's a lot of nervousness in the market, I think, in terms of progressing projects. So we have an awful lot of work that we've been awarded, but pressing the button for it to happen is just a bit slower than it could be, and at the moment we're relatively busy, and that it's just, I think we'll feel the real impact maybe next year. So there's certain parts of the sporting industry that just will not have cash flow for capital projects, especially as sort of, you know, lower league clubs and such like. I mean, they'll be doing well to survive without any revenue for a year, you know. So will they be able to spend on capital projects? Probably unlikely. I think the market will polarize. So I think a lot of the smaller, you know, be it from festivals and such like, through to the big guys with resource behind them and low debt will do better out of this than people who are just getting by, do you know? And the problem with our industry that it is a live entertainment, it's be it sport or entertainment, both are kind of historically balanced on that, just getting by, aren't they? Do you know what I mean? So I think it'd be interesting capital projects in the future where they are. We're quite lucky at HOK that we have a diversity in our expertise, that we do have healthcare, we do have science and technology, and we're utilising those guys in really looking at the way that we can design venues to make them safer in a post-COVID environment. There's a resistance to commit to push the button on these capital funds type projects, but we're not seeing a huge amount of, certainly in the Europe market, there's not, you know, people are taking steps to make amendments, but the long-term impact of you know, changing building structure is not as evident as, you know. I think there's a nervousness to commit to something which hopefully everyone's hoping will go away by the end of the year. I'm not sure that will be the case, but I think there will be a whole campaign to get people back in venues after the pandemic, and that will be based on PR and steps to mitigate contact, but also you know, mitigate contact, but also actually attract people back, make them feel safe and welcome. So I think that would be very interesting. I mean, you know, if the pandemic is something that we need to consider in the future, there are serious steps that we need to look at in terms of the design of venues. You know, this is from the density on concourses and you know, the way that crowds are managed. So the queuing rates and such like to get in venues, those touch points where you actually congregate in mass. The density in the buildings will need to manage in times of peak infection. I suspect that venues will be looking to reduce the density and capacity of people in spaces. So concourses will probably might get a little bit bigger. You'll have means of managing seats within venues, you know, spacing seats and such like, and having more flexible inventory that you can adapt the seat coverage for families or for individuals and such like. I think also there'll be you know, investment in mechanical and electrical side of things, in particular, you know, ventilation, you know, filters and such like. And you know, typically a lot of the venues are fed from the top, so dropping air on the crowd, creating pools of coolth. I think it'd be more a different strategy where we're actually drawing air through the buildings and taking it out at the top of the building. So almost extracting out through there and providing air at lower level would be probably seen as a safer means of actually ventilating these spaces. So I think that's quite an interesting shift. So where you have sort of underseat plenums and such like that provide air into the venue rather than providing air from above, will be interesting. And I think, you know, there'll be a reduction in touch points. We'll be looking at the types of materials we use in terms of the way that they can be cleaned and the way that, you know, fomites and such like survive on those materials. I think the way that the people in the people who work in these buildings need protecting as well. So the way that they can, you know, engage with the crowd, but also at the same time be safe, but also create a welcoming environment is a challenge. So I think some of those elements we'll be looking at. Clearly, the way that you enter the building is a key point. You know, the first impressions of that environment is very often the thoughts that you take away. So the way that the ticketing checks and such like maybe more reliant on technology. I think that reduction in you know, in meeting people directly will probably be looked at. Clearly, you know, the amount of wash hand basins and opportunities to wash your hands within a venue will be revised. And I think, you know, we really need to look at the planning of WCs to provide more spaces for washing hands and make sure that people do wash their hands as they come out. So there's maybe even sort of marshalling associated with that, which could be interesting. I think, merchandise, how will that be affected? Again, queuing systems and such like, maybe more reliant on technology. In this sort of world, it's quite interesting that in the pandemic world, certain trends that were going in that direction anyway have just been accelerated. So the take-up of technology has been significantly increased. Almost everybody now is using the internet to shop, when even the sort of, the people who come late to the technology table are now actually, adapting to the modern environment and using technology. So things such as ordering food and such like on your phone within these venues will be far more, people will be more used to it across the entire demographic population than maybe pre-COVID. So, there's things like that we will need to look at in the future. This is the really tough one, isn't it? Because, the crowd is for many businesses the core of their business model, and the numbers in the venue drive their business model, drive their revenue streams and such like. So, if those numbers are reduced, suddenly those business models don't work. So, how do we adapt, and how do we create, how do we compensate for that loss of revenue? And I think there's an opportunity to maybe look at overlay strategies where you can maybe create ancillary areas that can potentially enhance that capacity in the venue, but in a safe environment. I think obviously this connecting with their fan base or their customer base out with the venue is a key thing as well. So these revenue models, where you're just reliant on ticket sales and food and beverage and such like sales, is we're going to have to look at a far more diverse business model, and looking at how we can make more of that virtual world as well as the physical world to drive those models. I think will come forward. The venue design, I think, we're coming to a very interesting point where, there is talk of this sort of, a global recession off the back of the pandemic. And clearly there's, people losing their jobs at the moment, people coming off furlough and such like. And I think, in those markets, it's quite interesting that, we know that people are less likely to go to a venue because they won't have as much money. And I think what we do know, though, is that actually when they do go, if they're only going 1 or 2 or 3 times a year to these venues, they do typically spend a bit more money when they're there on those occasions, albeit they're going less frequently. So I think we need to look at our, the way the buildings are designed to optimize in relation to that. And I think really having a diversity of product that anyone can access is going to be key. And, and that we're seeing that trend anyway. But again, these pandemic environments seems to be accelerating certain trends that are we're already there, but they're just moving much faster, in particular in the technology world. Well, I mean, they're going to have to find a way of compensating for any loss of revenue in those spaces. So if previously it was as many seats as you can get in the venue, we now need to look at it a different way. And you can do that by optimizing the seats that you have in a venue. So you try and create a higher, more premium product. Now, we were seeing that anyway. We were seeing in the States in particular that some of the larger stadiums were taking out seats and putting in a more diverse range of premium offer, which actually needs more area. So you take the seats out and you enhance the seats that are there. I think we'll see more of a move towards that. So I think there will be an increase in a diversity of product, which will invariably mean seats being taken out of venues and having more room and such like, which obviously the more room is comfortable in a COVID environment. But also that you want something special in relation to that you can enjoy or experience above just the sort of the general admission ticket, the base ticket offer. Now that brings its own questions, doesn't it, in terms of the authentic fan and how do you create authentic fan experiences? It may be possible to find some positive aspects of the pandemic, and in particular, we're seeing sport clubs being the focal point of communities, and the fact that they've been able to engage with their communities and organise their communities is very exciting, and I can see that being a big part of the future. How that certainly from a grassroots level, the community response. A lot of these have been based around community sports clubs, football clubs, rugby clubs in particular, and the bigger clubs as well have also got that kind of ability to participate in the community more than maybe they have done. So I think that's a real positive opportunity for the future. using sporting clubs to actually connect people and bring people together, is a positive thing. I think the commercial environment is an interesting one where, the governments are looking to, stimulate the economy. So I think that there will be a couple of projects coming forward to do that. So certain projects will again be accelerated to really help people with jobs and such like. So I think some of these projects which have been, are they going to happen? Are they not? Will actually happen, which is contraindicative to the environment. But I think there is a need for projects out there for people to work on. So that could be a very positive thing. And I think we'll see some interesting changes as well in terms of approach to sustainability. I think, people have a lot of time to think over the last few months. And I think, there'll be more consciousness in terms of how healthy we are as a population and how healthy we'll be in the future. So really wellness and sustainability are going to be a real focal point of design in the future and design of venues as well.
I think the last time we had something very similar was the effect of safety when the 11th of September buildings and the terrorist attacks, and that caused a change in society, and it caused a change in architecture as well. So we must learn from these moments as well. In stadiums specifically also, we had a major change when the massive disasters in England resulted in changing from standing in stadiums to seating in stadiums, changing security and safety. And all of these two issues caused major changes in stadiums, if we to be honest, arenas. And we think this pandemic will do the same. I have developed a document which really sets aside the needs that modern stadiums will require for people to not only feel that they are safe, but they will be able to go there and watch the game. I've set out, there are two sort of main things, I think. If you sort of synthesize, I think it's to do with distance between people, and it's to do with not touching. And so all of the measures that we are talking about are to deal with keeping distances of people, how they enter the stadium, how they move in the stadium, how they arrive at the stadium, talking about public transport, and then how they sit in the bowl and how we treat that. And non-touching is also to do with how we do not touch things in the stadium. We do not touch handrails. We do not touch the tickets as we come in. We do not touch when we go to the toilet. We do not touch when we actually buy something for a concession. So these are all things that I've actually tried to bring to the front, especially in stadium architecture.